The chandelier lights sparkled above the Vienna concert hall like 1,000 tiny stars. Every seat was filled with people dressed in their finest clothes. Women wore elegant gowns that whispered when they walked. Men adjusted their bow ties and checked their expensive watches. This wasn't just any concert. This was the annual gala at one of Europe's most prestigious music conservatories. And everyone who was anyone in the classical music world had come to attend. Lily Rodriguez sat near the back of the grand hall, her fingers gripping her white cane a little too tightly. She was 14 years old, small for her age, with dark hair pulled back in a simple braid. Behind her dark glasses, her world was completely black. She had been blind for 7 years now, ever since a sudden illness had stolen her sight when she was just 7. But if you asked Lily what she missed most about seeing, she would tell you it wasn't the colors or the faces or even the sunsets. It was reading music sheets. She had loved watching the little black notes dance across the white pages when she was learning piano as a little girl. Next to her sat Mrs. Catherine Montgomery, her piano teacher for the past 5 years. Mrs. Montgomery was a kind woman in her 60s with gentle hands and a patient voice. She had silver hair always pinned up neatly, and she smelled like lavender and old books. She had been the one person who never treated Lily like she was broken after she lost her sight. Instead, Mrs. Montgomery had taught her to play piano by ear, by touch, by feeling the vibrations of the strings inside the grand piano. "Are you nervous, dear?" Mrs. Montgomery whispered, leaning close so only Lily could hear. Lily nodded. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it pounding in her ears. "What if I mess up? What if I forget?" "You won't forget," Mrs. Montgomery said softly, patting her hand. "Music isn't in your eyes, Lily, it's in your heart. And your heart knows every note." Lily wanted to believe her. She really did. But sitting in this magnificent hall, surrounded by so many important people, she felt very small and very scared. Mrs. Montgomery hadn't even told her about signing her up for the open performance segment until yesterday. "It's time," her teacher had said simply. "You're ready whether you believe it or not." The main performance began and the hall fell into reverent silence. Lily couldn't see the stage, but she could hear everything. The sound of polished shoes walking across the wooden stage floor. The small cough from someone in the third row. The rustle of programs as people checked to see who was performing. And then the music started. Maestro Alexander Moreau was playing tonight. Everyone in the classical music world knew his name. He was 42 years old and had been called a genius since he was 16. He had performed in every major concert hall across the globe. Critics wrote glowing reviews of his technical perfection. Other pianists studied his recordings like sacred texts. But Alexander Moreau was also known for something else. He was harsh, demanding. He expected perfection from everyone, especially his students. He had turned down more applicants to his private conservatory than he had ever accepted. When his fingers touched the piano keys, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Lily listened, completely absorbed. She could hear things in his playing that others might miss. The precise timing between notes. The way he controlled the volume, making some notes whisper and others soar. It was technically flawless. Perfect even. But as Lily listened, she felt something was missing. The music was beautiful, yes, but it felt cold somehow, like looking at a photograph of a sunset instead of actually watching one. The performance lasted 30 minutes. When the final note faded away, the audience exploded into applause. People stood up, clapping enthusiastically. Lily clapped too, but her stomach was doing nervous flips. Soon it would be intermission, and after intermission came the open performance segment, the part where she was supposed to play. "I can't do this," Lily whispered to Mrs. Montgomery as people began filing out to the reception area. "Did you hear him? He's perfect. Everyone here is probably just as good. I'm just a kid who can't even see the piano. You are a 14-year-old girl with more courage than most adults will ever have," Mrs. Montgomery said firmly. "And you play with something that Maestro Moreau has forgotten. You play with soul." They made their way slowly to the reception area. Lily's cane tapped against the marble floor as they walked. She could hear the conversations around her. People discussing the performance, praising Moreau's technique, comparing it to other concerts they had attended. Crystal glasses clinked. Expensive perfumes filled the air. Lily felt completely out of place in her simple blue dress that Mrs. Montgomery had helped her pick out. "Mrs. Montgomery," a voice called out. Lily heard her teacher's sharp intake of breath. "Maestro Moreau," Mrs. Montgomery said. and Lily could hear the nervousness in her voice. "Your performance was extraordinary, as always." "You're too kind," the maestro replied. His voice was smooth and confident. "I don't believe we've met before. Are you a teacher at the conservatory?" "I teach privately," Mrs. Montgomery explained. "I actually have a very talented student with me tonight. This is Lily Rodriguez." Lily felt her cheeks burn as attention turned to her. She gave a small, polite smile in the direction of the maestro's voice. There was a pause. Then Maestro Moreau spoke again, and his tone had changed. "The white cane. You're blind." "Yes, sir," Lily said quietly. "Since I was 7. Another pause. Then, to Lily's horror, the maestro laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh exactly, but it wasn't kind either. It was the laugh of someone who found something amusing that shouldn't be taken seriously. "A blind child studying piano," he said, loud enough that conversations around them began to quiet down. People were listening now. "Mrs. Montgomery, surely you understand that piano requires vision. How can she read the music sheets? How can she see where the keys are? The great composers wrote with visual intent. How can someone who has never seen truly understand what they meant to convey?" Lily's face felt like it was on fire. Her hands were shaking. She could feel people staring at her. "With respect, Maestro," Mrs. Montgomery began, her voice tight. "Lily plays by ear and has memorized over 50 classical pieces. How charming," a woman's voice interrupted. Lily could hear expensive jewelry jingling. "But perhaps the child would be happier simply listening to music, rather than attempting to perform it. Some things are just beyond certain limitations, dear." A few people laughed uncomfortably. Lily heard whispers spreading through the crowd like wildfire. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run out of this hall and never come back. Tears were building behind her dark glasses, and she bit her lip hard to keep them from falling. "Perhaps we should go," Lily whispered, tugging on Mrs. Montgomery's sleeve. But before they could move, the master of ceremonies' voice rang out through the reception area. "Ladies and gentlemen, intermission is ending. Please return to your seats. Our open performance segment will begin in 5 minutes." Lily's heart sank. 5 minutes. She had 5 minutes before she was supposed to walk up on that stage in front of all these people, who now thought she was just a blind girl who didn't know her place. Lily's hands were trembling as Mrs. Montgomery guided her back toward their seats. The whispers followed them like shadows. She could hear fragments of conversations as they passed. "Did you see that blind girl? Poor thing doesn't realize she's embarrassing herself. What was her teacher thinking bringing her here?" Each word felt like a tiny needle pricking her skin. Lily had faced challenges before because of her blindness. She had dealt with pity, with people speaking slowly to her as if she couldn't understand normal speech, with strangers grabbing her arm without asking. But this was different. This wasn't just pity. This was mockery. These people, these educated and sophisticated music lovers, thought she was a joke. "Don't listen to them," Mrs. Montgomery whispered fiercely as they sat down. Her teacher's hand was shaking too, but with anger, not fear. "They don't know what you can do, Lily. They don't know how hard you've worked." But Lily wasn't sure hard work mattered anymore. What was the point? Maestro Moreau was right, wasn't he? How could she truly understand music when she couldn't see the composer's notations, couldn't watch other pianists perform, couldn't even see the keys beneath her own fingers? The lights dimmed again, signaling that the open performance segment was beginning. Lily's stomach twisted into knots. Mrs. Montgomery had signed her up as a surprise, hoping to boost her confidence. Instead, it now felt like walking toward a cliff edge. The master of ceremonies, an older gentleman with a booming voice, stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We now begin our beloved tradition of open performances. Tonight we have 3 brave souls who will share their talents with us." 3 performers. Lily was the second one. She listened as the first performer was introduced. "Our first performer is Daniel Chen, a 17-year-old student from the Hong Kong Conservatory of Music." Applause rippled through the hall. Lily heard confident footsteps walking across the stage. A chair scraped. Then music filled the space. Daniel was good. Really good. He played Chopin with the kind of technical skill that came from years of rigorous training. His fingers flew across the keys with impressive speed. When he finished, the audience clapped enthusiastically. Lily's heart sank even further. How could she follow that? Our second performer, the master of ceremonies announced, and Lily's breath caught in her throat, is Lily Rodriguez, a 14-year-old private student. The applause was noticeably quieter this time. Lily could feel the judgment in the air, thick and heavy. She heard Maestro Moreau's voice from somewhere in the front rows, speaking to someone next to him, not even bothering to whisper. "This should be interesting," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I'm curious to see how she even finds middle C." A few people around him chuckled. Lily's throat tightened. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't do this. Mrs. Montgomery squeezed her hand. "Lily, sweetheart, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. We can leave right now. No one would blame you." And that was the moment everything changed. Because Mrs. Montgomery was giving her permission to quit, to run away, to let these people be right about her. And something deep inside Lily, something that had been growing quieter with each whisper and laugh, suddenly sparked to life. She thought about the day she lost her sight. Lying in that hospital bed, only 7 years old, realizing that the darkness wasn't going to go away when she woke up tomorrow. She thought about the first time she tried to walk with a cane. How she had fallen and scraped her knee and wanted to give up. She thought about the hundreds of hours she had spent learning to navigate a world designed for people who could see. But most of all, she thought about music. How it had saved her when everything else felt impossible. How when she sat at the piano, the darkness didn't matter anymore. How the keys beneath her fingers became her eyes, showing her colors and shapes and emotions that she couldn't see anywhere else. "No," Lily said quietly. Her voice was shaking, but it was determined. "I want to play." "Are you sure?" Mrs. Montgomery asked, concern filling her voice. Lily nodded. "They think I can't do it. They think being blind means I can't understand music. But they're wrong, Mrs. Montgomery. You know they're wrong." Her teacher was quiet for a moment. Then Lily felt warm arms wrap around her in a tight hug. "Yes," Mrs. Montgomery whispered. "They're very wrong. Now go up there and show them why." Lily stood up. Her legs felt like jelly, but she forced them to move. Mrs. Montgomery guided her to the aisle, and then Lily walked alone, her cane tapping softly against the carpet. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever. She could hear the silence around her. It wasn't the respectful silence that had greeted the previous performer. This was different, uncertain, skeptical. Some people were probably already reaching for their phones, ready to record what they expected to be a disaster. A staff member met her at the stage stairs. "Let me help you," the young man said kindly, taking her arm. "Thank you," Lily whispered. Her voice sounded small even to her own ears. He led her carefully up the 3 steps and across the stage. Lily's cane swept back and forth, and she heard every tiny sound. Someone coughing, a woman's uncomfortable laugh, the rustle of programs. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, even though she couldn't see them. "The piano is right here," the staff member said gently, positioning her in front of it. "The bench is about 6 inches behind you." Lily reached forward and felt the smooth, cool surface of the grand piano. It was a Steinway, she could tell from the way the wood felt beneath her fingers. She had only played on a Steinway twice before, both times at Mrs. Montgomery's friend's house. This was a bigger one, a concert grand. She turned and carefully sat down on the bench, adjusting her position. The stage lights were bright. She could feel their warmth on her face. She placed her cane carefully on the floor beside her, leaning it against the piano. Then she did what she always did before playing. She reached forward and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys, orienting herself. Finding middle C. Feeling the familiar pattern of white and black keys beneath her fingertips. This was her language. This was how she saw the world. But before she could begin, a voice cut through the silence. Maestro Moreau's voice, carrying clearly from the front of the audience. "Perhaps someone should hand her the sheet music," he said. Several people laughed. Lily's face burned. Her hands froze on the keys. For a moment, she almost stood up and ran off the stage. But then she remembered something Mrs. Montgomery had told her once, years ago. when Lily was crying because other kids at school had made fun of her white cane. People fear what they don't understand, Lily, and when they fear something, they mock it. But that says everything about them and nothing about you. Lily took a slow, deep breath. She thought about all the afternoons spent in Mrs. Montgomery's living room, learning to feel the music instead of see it. She thought about Beethoven, who composed some of his greatest works after losing his hearing. She thought about all the blind musicians throughout history who had been told they couldn't do it, and she thought about why she loved piano in the first place. Not because she wanted to impress people, not because she wanted to be famous, but because when she played, she felt free. When she played, she wasn't the blind girl. She was just Lily. And the music flowing from her fingers was her voice, clearer and stronger than any word she could speak. The room was completely silent now, waiting, judging, expecting her to fail. Lily lifted her hands slightly off the keys, positioned them carefully, and closed her eyes behind her dark glasses. Not that it made any difference to what she could see, but it helped her focus. It helped her listen to the music in her mind before her fingers brought it to life. She could hear Mrs. Montgomery's voice in her memory. Show them what you hear, Lily. Show them what music really is. In the audience, someone shifted in their seat, the sound loud in the tense quiet. A program rustled. Somewhere in the back, a door closed softly. The entire Vienna concert hall, with all its history and prestige and important people in expensive clothes, was holding its breath. And then Lily began to play. The first notes that came from the piano were soft, so soft that people in the back rows had to lean forward to hear them. Lily had chosen Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and she began with the opening movement, those haunting notes that sounded like sadness and hope mixed together. Her right hand moved delicately across the higher keys while her left hand provided the deep, steady rhythm below. The notes were simple at first, but there was something in the way she played them. Something that made people stop fidgeting, stop whispering, stop judging. In the front row, Maestro Moreau had his arms crossed, that same smirk still on his face. He was waiting for her to make a mistake, waiting to be proven right. But as the seconds ticked by, his expression began to change. Lily's fingers knew exactly where to go. She didn't need to see the keys. Her hands had memorized every distance, every interval. Middle C to E was a friend she'd known for years. The jump from C to the high F was a leap she'd made 1,000 times. The piano wasn't a mystery to her. It was home. But it wasn't just technical accuracy that filled the hall. It was emotion. Raw, pure emotion that seemed to pour out of every note. When Lily played sad passages, you could hear the loneliness in them. When she played the gentler parts, they felt like a mother's lullaby. She wasn't just pressing keys. She was telling a story without words. Mrs. Montgomery sat in her seat with tears already streaming down her face. She had heard Lily practice this piece hundreds of times, but something was different tonight. Maybe it was the beautiful Steinway grand piano. Maybe it was the acoustics of the concert hall. Or maybe it was that Lily was playing with everything she had, pouring 7 years of darkness and struggle and triumph into every single note. The woman who had laughed earlier, the one with the expensive jewelry, had stopped smiling. Her hand was pressed against her chest and her eyes were wide. Next to her, a music critic who had been ready to write a scathing review had put down his pen completely. He was just listening now, his mouth slightly open. Lily transitioned into the second movement, and this is where she began to make the piece her own. The second movement of Moonlight Sonata was lighter, more hopeful. But Lily added small variations, tiny changes that Beethoven himself might have approved of. She let some notes ring longer than usual. She added delicate ornamentations that weren't in the original score but fit perfectly. She was improvising, something that took incredible skill and deep understanding of music theory. You had to know the rules before you could break them, and Lily knew them. Not from reading books or studying sheets, but from years of listening, feeling, and living inside the music. A man in the 5th row wiped his eyes with his handkerchief. A teenage girl who had come with her parents clutched her mother's arm, completely mesmerized. Even the staff members who had heard thousands of performances in this hall had stopped what they were doing to listen. The third movement was approaching, and everyone who knew classical music knew what was coming. The third movement of Moonlight Sonata was intense, fast, technically demanding. It required both hands to move with incredible speed and precision. Many professional pianists found it challenging. How would a 14-year-old blind girl possibly manage it? Lily knew this was the moment everyone was waiting for. She could feel the anticipation in the air. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. She had practiced this movement until her fingers ached. Mrs. Montgomery had worked with her for months, breaking it down into small sections, helping her memorize every single note, every timing, every dynamic change. She began the third movement, and it was like a storm breaking. Her fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed. The notes tumbled over each other like water rushing down a mountain. Her left hand provided powerful bass notes while her right hand danced through the complex melody. The music was urgent, passionate, almost angry. Maestro Moreau sat up straight in his seat. His arms were no longer crossed. He was leaning forward now, his eyes fixed on Lily's hands. As someone who had played this piece himself hundreds of times, he knew how difficult it was. He knew every place where pianists typically stumbled. Every tricky transition, every moment where most people had to slow down slightly to get the notes right. Lily didn't slow down. She didn't stumble. Her fingers found every note with absolute certainty. It was as if the piano was an extension of her own body. She swayed slightly as she played, her whole body moving with the music. This wasn't a performance anymore. This was something deeper. This was a blind girl showing a room full of sighted people what it really meant to see. The music built and built, growing more intense with each measure. Lily's face showed the effort now. Small beads of sweat formed on her forehead. Her breathing was quick, but her hands never faltered. The notes came faster and faster, creating waves of sound that washed over the audience. People were crying openly now, not tears of pity, but tears of being moved by something beautiful, something real. A wealthy businessman who came to these concerts more for status than love of music found himself gripping the armrests of his seat, completely transported. A young piano student who had doubted her own abilities felt hope rising in her chest. If this blind girl could do this, maybe she could overcome her own obstacles too. Mrs. Montgomery wasn't even trying to wipe away her tears anymore. She just let them fall. This was why she taught. This moment right here. Watching a student she believed in prove to the world what she had always known. The piece was reaching its climax now. The final section where the music becomes almost wild, where both hands work together in perfect harmony to create something that sounds impossible. Lily's fingers were a blur. The notes rang out clear and perfect, filling every corner of the grand hall. The chandelier above seemed to tremble with the sound. And then, just as suddenly as the storm had begun, it ended. Lily played the final powerful chords, her hands coming down on the keys with confident strength. The last note hung in the air, vibrating through the strings, resonating in the wood of the magnificent Steinway, echoing off the walls of the Vienna concert hall. Then silence. Complete and absolute silence. Lily sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. She couldn't see the audience, but she could feel them. The silence stretched on for 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. It felt like an eternity. Had she messed up? Had she embarrassed herself after all? The silence was so complete that Lily started to panic. Maybe they were all sitting there in shock at how bad it had been. Maybe Maestro Moreau had been right and she had just proven it to everyone. Her hands started to shake. She reached down to grab her cane, ready to stumble off the stage as quickly as possible. But then it started. A single person began clapping. Then another. Then another. And then the entire audience erupted. The sound was like thunder. Hundreds of hands clapping together, the noise so loud it was almost overwhelming. But this wasn't polite applause. This wasn't the kind of clapping people do because they're supposed to. This was real. This was people who had witnessed something extraordinary. Lily's mouth fell open in shock. She could hear chairs scraping as people stood up. A standing ovation for her, the blind girl they had been mocking just 15 minutes ago. "Bravo," someone shouted. Then more voices joined in. "Bravo, bravo!" Mrs. Montgomery was on her feet, clapping so hard her hands hurt, tears streaming down her face. The music critic was standing, shaking his head in amazement. The woman with the jewelry had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with wonder. The teenage girl was jumping up and down, clapping and cheering. And in the front row, Maestro Alexander Moreau stood slowly. His face had completely changed. The smirk was gone. The arrogance was gone. His eyes were wet and his expression was one of pure awe. He brought his hands together in slow, deliberate claps, each one an admission that he had been terribly, completely wrong. Lily sat at the piano, unable to move, unable to process what was happening. The applause went on and on, showing no signs of stopping. People were calling out praise. Some were wiping their eyes. Others were turning to the people next to them, trying to find words for what they had just witnessed. The master of ceremonies rushed onto the stage, his own eyes misty. He gently touched Lily's shoulder. "Miss Rodriguez," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was absolutely remarkable." Lily's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Really?" "Really," he confirmed, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I've been hosting this event for 20 years, and I've never heard anything quite like that." The applause seemed to go on forever. Lily sat frozen at the piano, her mind struggling to understand what was happening. She had expected polite clapping at best, pitying silence at worst, but this was something she had never imagined. The sound surrounded her like a warm blanket, making her feel both incredibly small and somehow larger than life at the same time. The staff member who had helped her to the stage returned, gently touching her arm. "Miss, would you like help getting back to your seat?" Lily nodded, not trusting her voice. Her legs felt wobbly as she stood, reaching for her cane. The applause grew even louder when the audience saw her stand. She heard someone shout, "Beautiful!" and another voice called out, "Incredible!" As she made her way carefully across the stage, guided by the staff member, something unexpected happened. The third performer, a young woman who was supposed to play next, met them at the stairs. "I can't follow that," the woman said, and Lily could hear the smile in her voice. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I'm withdrawing from the performance. This night belongs to you." Lily felt her eyes fill with tears behind her dark glasses. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," the woman insisted. "What you just did up there, that's what music is supposed to be. Thank you for reminding all of us." By the time Lily made it back to her seat, her face was wet with tears. Mrs. Montgomery pulled her into a tight embrace, both of them shaking with emotion. "I'm so proud of you," Mrs. Montgomery whispered. "So incredibly proud. You were magnificent, Lily. Absolutely magnificent. Did I really do okay?" Lily asked, still not quite believing it. Mrs. Montgomery laughed through her tears. "Okay, sweetheart. You just gave one of the most moving performances this hall has ever seen." Around them, people were still standing, still clapping. Some were reaching out to touch Lily's shoulder as they passed, offering congratulations. An elderly gentleman leaned over from the row behind them. "Young lady," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I've been coming to concerts in this hall for 45 years. I've heard the greatest pianist in the world play on that stage. But what you just did, that touched my soul in a way I haven't felt in decades. Thank you." Lily could only nod, overwhelmed. More people approached, each with words of praise. A music professor from the conservatory, a concert pianist visiting from Japan, a composer who said Lily's interpretation had made her hear Beethoven in a completely new way. The attention was almost too much. Lily held tight to Mrs. Montgomery's hand, anchoring herself. The master of ceremonies had to ask everyone to return to their seats multiple times before the crowd finally settled down. The atmosphere in the hall had completely changed. Where before there had been stuffiness and judgment, now there was warmth and excitement. People were whispering to each other, but not with mockery anymore. They were sharing their amazement, their disbelief that someone so young could play with such depth. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced, "due to the overwhelming response and with the gracious permission of our final scheduled performer, we will end tonight's open performances with Miss Rodriguez's extraordinary presentation. However, before we conclude this evening, it appears someone would like to address the audience." Lily heard footsteps on the stage, confident footsteps that walked with purpose. She recognized the sound of expensive leather shoes on wood. Her stomach tightened. "That's Maestro Moreau," Mrs. Montgomery whispered. Lily's hands gripped the armrests of her seat. Was he going to criticize her performance? Point out mistakes she had made? She held her breath, waiting. "Good evening." Maestro Moreau's voice came through the microphone. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was different from before. Softer, humbler. "I need to say something, and I need to say it publicly, in front of all of you who witnessed what just happened." Another pause. Lily could hear him take a deep breath. 42 years ago, I played my first note on a piano. I was 3 years old. Since then, music has been my entire life. I've studied with the best teachers in the world. I performed in every major concert hall. I've won awards and received praise from critics. And somewhere along the way, I forgot something crucial. I forgot what music actually is. Lily heard him move, his footsteps pacing across the stage. Music isn't about reading notes on a page. It isn't about perfect technique or flawless execution. Those things matter, yes, but they're not what makes music alive. What makes music alive is soul, heart, the willingness to be vulnerable and honest. And tonight, a 14-year-old girl who cannot see reminded me of that truth. Lily's heart was pounding. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Earlier this evening, Maestro Moreau continued, his voice thick with emotion. I said cruel things. I mocked the idea that someone who is blind could truly understand music. I was arrogant. I was wrong. And I was speaking from a place of fear. Fear, someone in the audience called out. Yes, fear, the maestro confirmed. Fear that everything I thought I knew, everything I had built my career on might be incomplete. Fear that I had spent so many years perfecting my technique that I had lost touch with why I fell in love with music in the first place. Miss Rodriguez's performance forced me to confront that, and I am grateful even though it's painful to admit. Lily felt Mrs. Montgomery squeeze her hand. I have performed in the greatest concert halls in the world, Maestro Moreau said, but I have never heard music played with such pure, honest emotion. Miss Rodriguez didn't just play Beethoven. She lived it. She breathed it. Every note carried weight and meaning. She showed me that true vision comes from within, not from our eyes. Lily heard him walking again, his footsteps coming down the stage stairs. The audience was completely silent, hanging on his every word. Miss Rodriguez, he called out. Where are you seated? Mrs. Montgomery stood, raising her hand. We're here, Maestro. Footsteps came up their aisle. Lily's heart raced as they grew closer. Then she felt a presence beside her seat. She could smell expensive cologne and hear breathing slightly quickened by emotion. Miss Rodriguez, Maestro Moreau said, and his voice was right next to her now. May I sit down? Of course, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. She heard him settle into the empty seat beside her. There was a long moment of silence. Then she felt him take her hand. His hand was warm and slightly calloused from years of playing piano. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. Not just for what I said tonight, but for the attitude I've carried for years. I've been so focused on perfection that I've forgotten compassion. So focused on technique that I've forgotten soul. You taught me more in 12 minutes than I've learned in years. Lily didn't know what to say. This was the great Maestro Alexander Moreau, one of the most famous pianists in the world, apologizing to her. I also want to make you an offer, he continued. I run a private conservatory in Vienna. We accept only a handful of students each year. I would be honored if you would consider studying with us. Full scholarship. Whatever accommodations you need, we'll provide them. I want to learn from you as much as I hope you might learn from me. Lily's mouth fell open. Mrs. Montgomery gasped beside her. You want me to study with you? Lily asked in disbelief. I would consider it a privilege, Maestro Moreau replied. But more than that, I think you could teach my other students something invaluable. You could show them what I've failed to teach them. That music isn't played with the eyes or even with the hands. It's played with the heart. Tears were streaming down Lily's face now. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, the maestro said gently. Talk it over with Mrs. Montgomery. I can tell she's been an excellent teacher. You're welcome to continue working with her as well. We can arrange whatever makes you comfortable. Mrs. Montgomery was crying too. Maestro, I don't know how to thank you. Don't thank me, he said, standing up. Thank your student. She's the one who opened my eyes tonight, quite literally. He chuckled softly at his own words, then his voice became serious again. Miss Rodriguez, regardless of what you decide about the conservatory, I want you to know something. You have a rare gift, not just talent, though you have that in abundance, but you have something more important. You have the ability to make people feel. That's what the greatest musicians do, and you're already doing it at 14. Never let anyone tell you that you can't do something because of your blindness. After tonight, I don't think anyone would dare. Lily heard him walk back up the aisle. The audience erupted in applause again, this time even louder than before. They were applauding his apology, his humility, his recognition of what truly mattered. Mrs. Montgomery pulled Lily close. You did it, sweetheart. You didn't just play beautifully. You changed hearts, starting with the hardest heart in the room. Lily sat there, surrounded by applause, her head spinning with everything that had happened. 2 hours ago, she had been terrified and humiliated. Now she was being offered a chance to study at one of Europe's most prestigious music conservatories. And more importantly, she had proven something to herself. She wasn't limited by her blindness. She was defined by her passion, her dedication, and her love for music. The evening concluded with more congratulations, more tears, and more promises to stay in touch from people Lily had never met before. But through it all, she held tight to Mrs. Montgomery's hand, grateful for the teacher who had believed in her when no one else did. As they finally prepared to leave the hall, Lily felt different, stronger, more confident. She had walked into this building as a scared girl who worried she didn't belong. She was leaving as a pianist who had touched hearts and changed minds. The night air was cool when they stepped outside. Lily took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs. "Ready to go home?" Mrs. Montgomery asked. Lily smiled. "Actually, can we stop by your studio? I have some ideas for what I want to work on next." Mrs. Montgomery laughed, a sound full of joy and pride. "Of course we can, my dear. Of course we can." 6 months had passed since that night at the Vienna concert hall. 6 months that had changed everything for Lily Rodriguez. She sat backstage at the prestigious Royal Theatre, waiting for her name to be called. Her hands rested calmly in her lap, fingers occasionally moving as if playing invisible keys. This was different from last time. Last time she had been terrified, humiliated, unsure if she belonged. Tonight she was nervous, yes, but it was the good kind of nervousness. The kind that comes from excitement rather than fear. 5 minutes. "Miss Rodriguez," a stagehand called out softly. "Thank you," Lily replied, her voice steady. Mrs. Montgomery sat beside her like always. Even though Lily now studied at the Moreau Conservatory, her old teacher still came to every performance, every practice session that she could attend. Their relationship had grown beyond teacher and student. They were family now. "How are you feeling?" Mrs. Montgomery asked, though she already knew the answer. She always did. "Ready?" Lily said simply, and she meant it. The past 6 months had been like living in a dream. After that night, videos of her performance had spread across the internet. Someone in the audience had recorded it on their phone, and within days, millions of people had watched the blind girl who played Beethoven with such raw emotion that even the harshest critic had cried. News stations wanted interviews. Music magazines wrote articles. Other blind children and their parents reached out, saying that Lily had given them hope. Schools invited her to speak. But through it all, Lily stayed focused on what mattered most to her: the music. Studying at the Moreau Conservatory had been challenging in the best possible way. Maestro Moreau was still demanding, still pushed for excellence, but he had changed. He was kinder now, more patient. He told his students that technical perfection without emotion was just noise, and he often used Lily as an example of playing with true feeling. The other students had welcomed her warmly. At first, Lily worried they might resent her for getting special attention, but instead they were curious and supportive. A student named Chen had learned Braille music notation just so he could help Lily study new pieces. Another student, Isabella, had become her closest friend, describing the music scores in vivid detail that helped Lily understand the composer's intentions. But the most surprising friendship had been with Maestro Moreau himself. He visited her practice sessions regularly, not just to teach but to learn. He asked her how she visualized music, how she memorized complex pieces, what she felt when she played. Their conversations had opened both their minds to new possibilities. "You know," he had told her one afternoon, "I spent 30 years teaching students to play perfectly. Now you've taught me to help them play truthfully. That's far more valuable." Tonight was special, though. This wasn't a conservatory recital or a student performance. This was Lily's first professional concert. She would be performing as the opening act before a symphony orchestra performance. Real tickets had been sold. Professional musicians would be in the audience. Music critics would be writing reviews. The door to the backstage area opened and Lily heard familiar footsteps. Expensive leather shoes on polished floors. She smiled. "Maestro," she greeted him. "Lily," Maestro Moreau replied warmly. "I wanted to check on you before you go on. Though I suspect you don't need any last-minute advice." "I always appreciate your wisdom," Lily said. He sat down on her other side, and for a moment, The three of them sat in comfortable silence. The teacher who had believed in Lily from the beginning. The mentor who had learned to believe in her. And Lily herself, no longer the scared girl who worried she didn't belong. "Do you remember what you told me the first day I came to your conservatory?" Lily asked the maestro. "I told you many things," he replied with a slight chuckle. "You said that every musician has a unique voice, and my job was to find mine. You said that blindness didn't limit me. It gave me a different perspective that could make my music more powerful if I learned to embrace it." "I meant every word," Maestro Moreau said, "and you've proven me right 100 times over." 2 minutes. "Miss Rodriguez," the stagehand called. Lily stood, reaching for her cane. Mrs. Montgomery and Maestro Moreau stood with her. Mrs. Montgomery hugged her tightly. "You've already made me so proud," she whispered. "Now go out there and share your gift with the world." Maestro Moreau took Lily's hand in both of his. "Remember, you're not playing for the critics or the audience. You're playing for yourself, for the music, and for every person who has ever been told they can't do something. Show them what's possible." Lily nodded, feeling the weight of his words but not crushed by them. Instead, they lifted her up. The stagehand guided her to the wings of the stage. She could hear the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. Hundreds of people waiting. Unlike that night 6 months ago, she wasn't walking into a room full of skeptics. These people had come specifically to hear her play. They wanted to hear the blind pianist who had touched so many hearts. But that brought its own pressure. What if tonight's performance didn't live up to their expectations? What if the magic of that first performance had been a one-time thing? As if sensing her thoughts, the stagehand spoke quietly. "My daughter is out there tonight. She's 8 years old and blind, just like you. She's been learning piano for a year now, and you're her hero. Thank you for showing her that she can dream big." Lily felt tears prick her eyes. This was why she played. Not for fame or recognition, but for moments like this. For little girls who needed to see that blindness wasn't the end of their dreams, just a different path to reach them. "What's your daughter's name?" Lily asked. "Natalie," the stagehand replied. "Tell Natalie that I'm playing for her tonight," Lily said. The house lights dimmed. The audience grew quiet. The announcer's voice came over the speakers, introducing her. Lily heard her story being told. The girl who had been mocked and then proved everyone wrong. The student who had taught her teacher. The 14-year-old who was now 15 and already inspiring thousands. The applause began even before she stepped onto the stage. Lily walked out confidently, her cane tapping a steady rhythm. She had practiced this walk dozens of times. She knew exactly how many steps to the piano bench. The audience's applause grew louder as they saw her, and she could feel their warmth, their encouragement, their belief in her. She sat at the piano, a beautiful Steinway, just like before. She positioned herself, found middle C, and let her fingers rest on the keys. The applause faded to silence, a good silence, an anticipatory silence. Tonight she wasn't playing Beethoven. Tonight she had chosen something different. She had chosen Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece about night, about darkness, about finding beauty when you couldn't see. It felt appropriate. Lily took a breath and then she began to play. The first notes floated out into the theater like whispers. Soft and gentle like moonlight on water, the melody was bittersweet, full of longing and hope. Her right hand sang the melody while her left hand provided a gentle, rocking accompaniment. She poured everything into this performance. Her gratitude for Mrs. Montgomery's unwavering support. Her appreciation for Maestro Moreau's humility and growth. Her hope for little Natalie sitting somewhere in the audience, watching a blind pianist and dreaming of her own future. Her love for music that had carried her through the darkest times. The piece built and swelled, the emotions growing stronger. There were moments of sadness, but they resolved into moments of peace. There were questions in the music, but also answers. It was a conversation between darkness and light, between doubt and faith, between fear and courage. In the audience, Maestro Moreau sat with his eyes closed, just listening. He was hearing things in this music he had never noticed before. Lily's interpretation was unique, personal, honest. This was what he tried to teach his students now. Not just to play the notes, but to find themselves in the music. Mrs. Montgomery watched Lily's face as she played, seeing the concentration, the joy, the complete absorption in the music. This was the little girl who had cried in her living room years ago, convinced she would never play piano again because she couldn't see. Look at her now. The stagehand stood in the wings with tears in his eyes, thinking of his daughter Natalie, hoping she understood what she was witnessing. That limitations were often just illusions. That the human spirit could overcome almost anything with determination and passion. The piece came to its gentle conclusion, the final notes hanging in the air like stars. Lily held the last chord, letting it fade naturally, her foot on the sustain pedal. When silence finally came, she lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like a wave building in the ocean, the applause began. It started as a rumble and built into a roar. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, cheering, some crying, all of them moved by what they had just experienced. Lily stood and turned toward the audience, a smile spreading across her face. She couldn't see them, but she could feel them. Their energy, their appreciation, their love. She bowed, and the cheering grew even louder. Backstage, she was greeted by Mrs. Montgomery and Maestro Moreau, both beaming with pride. But the most special moment came when the stagehand approached with his daughter. "Miss Rodriguez," he said. "This is Natalie." A small hand grabbed Lily's, squeezing tight. "You were amazing," a little voice said, full of wonder. "I want to play just like you when I grow up." Lily knelt down, bringing herself to the child's level. "You'll play even better than me, Natalie." "You know why?" "Why?" the little girl asked. "Because you have something I didn't have when I was your age. You have proof that it's possible. You've seen someone do it, so you know you can do it too. That makes you stronger than I was." Later that night, as Lily and Mrs. Montgomery rode home together, they sat in comfortable silence. Finally, Mrs. Montgomery spoke. "You know what the best part of tonight was?" "What?" Lily asked. "Watching you own that stage. Not as a blind pianist, just as a pianist. That's what you've become, Lily. The blindness is just a detail. You're simply a brilliant musician who happens to be blind." Lily smiled. That was exactly right. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped seeing herself as different and started seeing herself as simply herself. The piano didn't care if she could see. The music didn't care. And now, finally, neither did she. She thought about little Natalie, about all the messages she received from other blind children, about the people in the audience tonight who came not out of pity, but out of genuine desire to hear beautiful music. She thought about Maestro Moreau, whose heart had been changed by a 14-year-old girl with a white cane. She thought about Mrs. Montgomery, who had never stopped believing. And she thought about herself 6 months ago, terrified on that stage in Vienna. If she could go back and tell that scared girl anything, it would be simple. You belong here. You always did. Now play.